I think we often underestimate the spiritual or the potential of our real spiritual nature. And part of my work and part of the vision behind coming together is to explore or even activate the transformative potential of real spiritual energy, and the sense that it actually has a very vital role to play, not only in our own individual transformation, and many people here have been on their own journey long enough to have experienced that potential within themselves and how it can completely transform one's life. Sufis would talk about lifting the veil between ego consciousness and one's higher consciousness, but that it really takes you out of a very small space into an infinitely expanding space, into this dimension of the self that is within the heart. And then to take it, the next step is, what is this transformative potential, or what does this transformative potential mean for the whole? Because we seem as a culture to have become fixated on the individual, as if the individual's transformation or our own transformation is what it's all about. And we don't realize how much our cultural conditioning has contextualized us into this focus on the individual. We don't realize this is just a very recent paradigm, if you like, a very recent focus. And I remember somebody talking about shamanism and saying that the New Age never had much meaning for the shaman, because for the shaman it was always about the whole. That's all that ever mattered. And so it is to try and liberate one's own spiritual potential from this focus on the individual and individual fulfillment. Because of course one of the things you realize when you, I don't like to say get somewhere because there's nowhere to get, when you access something within yourself, is there is no such thing as an individual. This is one of the great illusions that our own ego consciousness presents to us. And once you step into the arena of oneness, what the Sufis called the arena of the heart, or the arena of love, then you realize that everything is one, and you are not part of that oneness, you are that oneness. And so then, how can we use what is within us, what is behind the veil of appearances within us, in service to the one, in service to this whole? And I want to talk this morning about light, because that is one way of exploring one's spiritual potential. It is, there are whole esoteric traditions about working with light. One of the very first books I ever read, I think I was 18, and I read The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is a Chinese Taoist classic that talks about creating the light body. And I was just incredibly moved by that, because I suddenly saw you can actually do that. It's a little book translated from the Chinese by Wilhelm that actually Carl Jung gave an introduction to. And it talks about creating a body of light, one's light body, that gives one the ability then to access a certain spiritual dimension. And so there is, in many different traditions, there is a whole esoteric knowledge of working with light. And so I want to use the image of working with light as a way to explore how we can use this spiritual potential within us. Now, we all have a certain light within us. It actually comes into this incarnation at 3 months when the soul comes into the fetus in the womb. It is part of the light of the soul or the light of the self. I use the word soul and self synonymously. And when a baby is born, you see it in the child. I think it is one of the reasons that a young baby gives us this extraordinary feeling of joy, is once again unknowingly we see that light, that purity of intention that we knew we once had. It's there in a baby. It is actually, in a way, their body is actually created out of light. It is part of the whole mystery of conception, and it has to do with the whole feminine mystery of creation, how a woman can give birth to a soul within herself. I don't want to go into that in detail now because I don't have the time, but when a baby is born, something in us responds, and there is this joy that also belongs to this purity of light that's there, that comes from one world into this world, and it touches something very deeply in us. The Sufis call this the spark in the heart, and it's there in a child. And it stays very present in the first few years of life, God willing. There's the English poet William Wordsworth, he talks about this. He had this direct experience as a child that he then remembered later on. And he says, if I can remember it correctly, not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. And then he begins to describe this transition. The prison walls close round the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. But it is that allows the child to have the direct experience of life. Because in this light of the self, which is within the child, you see and experience life directly. And how do you know that? Because later on the journey, when this light, through the grace of God, through some extraordinary happening, reawakens, you can once again have that direct experience that you had as a child. In Zen it's called Satori. That moment when once again the strawberry is just a strawberry. When in the classic Zen poem, the old pond, the frog jumps in, plop. There is that moment of direct experience which you have through the light of the self. If you didn't have access to the light of the self, you would not have that direct experience. The ego, as you well know, has very different experiences. It has experiences that involve judgment, comparison, and all the veils that the ego creates, all the distortions that the ego creates, to give you the apparent or the illusion of experiencing life. But there is this pure light of the self. As I say, it comes into the body, is given by the soul, by the self, into the human being. And it allows for this initial direct experience of life, the heaven being around us in our infancy. And then, as Wordsworth said, the prison walls close around the growing boy. My teacher, she said, really it's by the time you're 5 and you go to school and all the competition and all the education, it clouds it. You lose it. There is the possibility now that there are children being born today who don't have to lose it to such a degree as many of us did. Some call these children indigo children. I don't know exactly, but you lose it. It fades away, and you then begin to experience the world around you. And then, traditionally, there comes this moment, the Sufis call it tauba, the turning of the heart, when something extraordinary happens within the human being, and this light is again awakened. It's always been there in the background. I think for most people it is either conscience or the spark of intuition. That's how it comes into most people's life. There is this conscience, this light that they can refer to. Because please remember, you can't see anything without light. You see the world of illusion through the reflected light of the ego. This apparent world that we live in. It's not actually the world we live in, but it's the world that we have, our mind and our ego create, that we apparently live in. And you see the real world through the real light of the self. It's quite a different light. I think St. Paul, he talks about, now you see through a glass darkly, then you shall see face to face. Now you know in parts, then you shall know even as you are known. It is part of the light of the self that in that light you are known for your real self. A very beautiful experience. I'm sure many of you have had that. And it's one of the esoteric things that happens when you meet a teacher or you meet your teacher. You are, for the first time often in your life, known for your real self. What actually happens is the light of the teacher sees you as you really are. You can't see your real self in the distorted light of the ego. And the ego, as you know, works in duality. It always sees good and bad, light and dark, yes and no. It has comparisons. That's how the ego functions. It's judging all the time. Even in the classic thing of the strawberry, is this strawberry that I'm tasting now, is it as good as the last strawberry I tasted? Is it really the best strawberry? Is it who knows what? And so the actual experience of the strawberry, that pure sweetness, is never experienced. But traditionally, when you meet a teacher, you are known as you really are. It is an extraordinary moment. It is something, there is this recognition. This often comes through the eyes of the teacher, and many people have an experience of a light coming from the eyes of the teacher. And in that light you are seen. This is the light of the self, the light of what is real that sees what is real. Now, as I say, traditionally there is this moment in the destiny of the soul when through grace, good fortune, maybe pure chance, I doubt it, but the light is woken up again. Maybe you meet somebody, you read a book. It happened to me when I was 16 and I read this Zen koan. The wild geese do not intend to cast their reflection. The water has no mind to receive their image. It woke me up. Suddenly a light shone and I saw the world completely differently after that. Completely different world. I was still at English boarding school. But it was this unbelievable joy, this light. I can see it even now, the light dancing off the water in the river Thames that ran by my boarding school. It was completely different. It was the same but completely different because the light of the self was present. Now, this is of course a moment of grace. It's just given to us, this moment of awakening. And then there is the whole concern, what do you do then? I suppose there are two schools of thought. One says, you just let it happen. This is, if you like, very, very pure Zen, which I studied for a while. It says, even to do any practice is an imposition of something unnatural onto a completely natural phenomena. You should just let it be because it is. It belongs to that pure, uncontaminated dimension of yourself, your real natural self, and it is. I remember trying that for a while very, very intensely, and was actually coupled at the time with some teachings of Krishnamurti that come from a similar place. It didn't really work. So the other school of thought says, then if you haven't found a teacher already, you look for a teacher, you look for a path. And if you find a teacher and you find a path, then you embark upon the practices of the path. And then begins the journey of the soul. Until then, you had the journey of the ego, the journey of the personality. But traditionally, at that moment, then it's called the second birth. The soul wakes up again in this life, and then you begin the journey of the soul. The journey back to God, back to the source, back to the face you had before you were born. Now, what most people don't realize when they do the practices on the path, when they develop their awareness, whatever the path it is, it doesn't matter which path it is, they're all designed really for the same purpose, is that these practices are helping you to develop your light. You may think you are sitting in meditation trying to still the mind, you are being conscious of the breath, you are doing these practices of awareness. Yes, that is how it appears from the perspective of the ego and the physical body that you bring to the experience or to the mind. But underneath, behind the scenes, what almost all these practices are doing is they are making your light brighter. And you can see that very, very clearly on the inner planes. Those who can have access to see things on the inner planes, because the more a human being works on themselves, the brighter their light shines. The more that light of the self, that light of what is real, it shines more and more brightly. And it's very, very beautiful. You can see it in the eyes in this world. That's probably the most direct experience. That's why it is said the Prophet, peace be upon him, loved perfume and beautiful women and the shining of eyes in prayer. When a human being prays and looks towards God, turns towards the divine inside of them, then that light shines through them. It is the light of pure awareness. It is the light of the divine. It is incredibly beautiful. It is, and it grows. It grows and grows and grows. This is the development of the light body of the human being. This is, in a way, seen from the inner world, this is one of the primary functions of all spiritual practice. You know, it appears through meditation you're learning to still the mind. Yes, but why? So the mind does not interfere. So the light that is within you can shine through. And you do this for many, many, many years. You work on your light grows. It is really the cornerstone of much, much spiritual work. And then there is, combined with this, a very, very mysterious process, which the Sufis call light upon light. Light rises towards light, and light comes down upon light, and it is light upon light. As you work upon your own self, and again, it doesn't matter what practices you do, it's the intention behind that matters. Your light grows, and it also attracts to itself another light, which is, if you like, the light of your divine potential that is waiting for you to be lived. It's waiting for you. For most people, this is the light they meet at the end of the tunnel after they die. Many people have had near-death experiences of that. It's the light of their spiritual self they meet after they die. If you're interested in spiritual life here in this world, if you're interested in mysticism, you want to live it here now. You don't want to wait till after you die. You want to live that light here in this world. And so you claim it. It comes to meet you. It's a very, very beautiful process. You work on yourself and you magnetically attract into this incarnation, even into the physical body. The physical body even changes. The cells in the physical body start to spin at a different frequency because they have this light. It actually attracts new, different physical cells to your body because you need new cells to be able to bear that light. As your spiritual self changes, you have to live a certain light in the world, and you need a different physical body to do it. So your light will attract to it different physical cells. I think that the cells change every 7 years, I'm not quite sure. But you attract new cells to you that are able to live spiritual light. They have to move at a different frequency. They can't be so dense. It's why one of the reasons as you go on, you may find you become more sensitive. You can't eat the same amount of junk food you used to eat. You're actually changing. Your metabolism is changing. Your spiritual vibration is changing. You're actually, in spiritual terms, you're becoming quicker and quicker. You're speeding up. So this is the process that's happening within you. And on our particular path, 10, 20 years of this work. And then there is this union of light upon light, in which the two lights come together. And that is I suppose you would call it enlightenment. I'm not quite sure, I'm never quite sure what enlightenment is supposed to mean. But the Sufis call it unio mystica, union with God. When you realize your divine nature, when you become fully conscious of what you were before you were, of who you really are, not this illusory ego, not this complex, convoluted self, but this pure essence. And there is this, it can come in a moment of bliss, a moment of real awakening, and you are then yourself. And you are then yourself for the rest of that incarnation, of that life. Yes, there is a whole process of how do you live yourself. But there is this moment when the two lights come together. And it is like inwardly it is like the birth of a star. It is a dramatic cosmic event, because we all have that potential within us. And the Sufis say all of creation rejoices, because it is really creation realizing its deepest potential. A human being waking up completely, being completely present, knowing who you are. It is, the Sufis call it coming home. You just come home. Of course, it's not the end of the journey, but you claim your light, your real light, and then you have to live that light. Now, traditionally, then, you either, in some traditions, in some, I think Buddhist traditions, I'm not quite sure, that's the time you are given a choice. You can go then if you want. You can just go. You're free. You are completely and totally free. You've realized your real nature. You can leave this world behind. And it's very, very easy to die then, because certain attachments that keep you on the physical plane have been burnt out. And so there are Buddhist trainings where you then do a certain meditation practice, and you go through all the levels of reality within yourself, and you get to a certain place, and once you go beyond that certain place, you don't come back. And the body of the monk is just sitting there in meditation, and there's nobody there anymore. Or you can choose to come back. The old monk then returns to the marketplace in this beautiful Zen story of the different stages of the journey, the ox herding pictures. He comes back. Everything he looks upon is enlightened, because there is this pure presence, this pure light within him. It's just a completely natural way of being. That light within the human being touches everything it comes into contact with, and everything is awakened. It's a very natural, very beautiful process. And that's it. That is the classic journey. It's living the Bodhisattva motif, which is why in the Sufi tradition we say after the state of union with God becomes the station of servanthood. You go back into the world in service to the One, living the One, being the One. You have an outer appearance of an ordinary individual person, but within that there is this ever-expanding dimension of the One. You are the One. And you can read texts of people who have got to this stage and they have lost their individual self. There are many stories of that. And You live the one. But unfortunately, there aren't so many people that do this. It takes 20, 30 years unless you are, predestined to go through it earlier. It's a very, very labor-intensive process. It requires enormous physical, emotional, mental sacrifice on all levels. And but there is another tradition that is not so well known, which is there are moments in the destiny of the planet when the gates of grace open, and what used to be only available to the few is then given to many, or available to many. And there is, at this time, in cosmic time, if you like, in the planet, there is a need for anyone who has access to their light to live it in relationship to the whole. Say, traditionally, you only got to do that after you'd been through the journey. You sat in your cell or your ashram for 20 years. You go through all the stages of the path. Then you were allowed to teach. You weren't allowed to teach before then. Then you were allowed to go back into life. But, if you like, the rules have changed at this moment. If you like to look at it differently, the soul of the world is in need, is in dire need. And it has called out. It has called out to all those who have been awakened to their light. And it has said, there is a need for a certain light to be given to the world. And it is no longer enough just for the however many completely illumined beings there are on the planet. And there are only ever a few in number. There is a need for more people to be involved in this work, for more people to use their light in service to the whole. And this is, for me, where it gets very, very interesting. Because once you have been through all the stages of the path, you know your light is not your light. Traditionally, you know the individual Atma is the universal Atma. It's a very beautiful cosmic experience in which you realize yourself is not even yourself, it never was yourself. It is the universal self. It's a basic kind of experience on that. But you don't realize that after you've just been being a few years on the path. You don't know that. You still think it's your light. You've discovered it within yourself. It's changed your life. It's done extraordinary things to you. It's completely expanded your horizon. It's given you access to energies inside of yourself. You've met people you never would have met if you didn't have access to your light. It's one of the beautiful mysteries of spiritual friendship. I don't know if you're aware of it, but once you have access to your light, that light within you sees the people who have access to their light. It sees this resonance. This is when spiritual companionship starts to happen. One of my favorite Sufi poets, Abul Kahir, he says, what was more pleasing than when friend was with friend? The rest was only grief, while that was all joy. It is an extraordinary thing when your light wakes up and it starts to resonate. And you may find yourself with people who on a personality level, on a background level, you have nothing in common with. But suddenly there is something else. There is a resonance of light to light. You can actually see it on the inner planes because the light, your light, attracts itself to people whose light has a similar frequency. It's very, very simple. But what you then begin to see is that light is working in its own way. And I say it's not really your individual light. You think it is. It's changed your life. It's completely transformed you, and it's a transformation that goes on and on and on and on. You are always beginning. I've been in this business since I was 16, and it still changes one, and you are always about to begin a new stage, a new expansion in all sorts of unexpected ways. the light that has woken up inside of you, that you work on, you really develop inside yourself. And in a way you give the best part of your life to it. Because that is real spiritual service. That is real. It is not your light. It never was your light. It is the light of the divine or the light of what is real. It is one light. It can never be two lights because it is a dimension of pure oneness. Once you wake up on the plane of the self, you see it. Pure oneness, pure awareness. It is not your awareness. It is awareness. You know. It is not you know something. It's just present. There is this incredible awareness. There is this light. And it works quite differently. This is this plane of light upon light. Light speaks to light. Light communicates to light. It is very, very efficient. It has no miscommunication. It is how, in our particular tradition, most of the teaching is done. It is done, the Sufis say, from heart to heart. But it is that dimension of pure light within oneself. It's often also communicated through the brow chakra that works with light, or through the eyes. It's the light of the teacher talks to the light of the individual directly. It is a recognition, it is direct communication, it's very efficient. What I actually find interesting as a mystic is to see that this whole planet is evolving into working with light. And on many different levels. One of the most obvious, there are two obvious levels. One is that we're beginning to understand the potential of solar power. I'm quite convinced that in 100 years' time, solar power will be the energy source of the future on one level, because it's completely free and it completely does not pollute. It's a very, very beautiful energy source. We will learn how to work with light on the physical level. And also, it is a very, very important part of computer communication through fiber optic cables. It communicates on the level of light. There's a very interesting thing that in the last decade, more fiber optic cable has been laid around the world than anybody knows what to do with. They overexpanded. They thought it was going to be used for all sorts of things, and they put it around the world, and it's waiting there, ready to be used, this whole network of light. Because on fiber optic cables, you communicate with light very, very efficiently, very directly, almost instantaneously. And that's another level that light is going to be used. And then there is the whole, what we'd call spiritual dimension of working with light, which I think is very, very important, which is because light is so powerful, and that light cannot be caught in ego dynamics. There are no power dynamics with light because it's free. It's about the only thing that's free and that is not polluted. Even the water's polluted. But light is free, light is not polluted, and the light of a human being, the real light of a human being, is the light of the divine within them. You cannot capture it, you cannot market it, you cannot sell it. Why? Because it functions in a different way, it functions on a different frequency. And it has to do with this inner potential, this inner transformative energy that is within all of us. And as I say, normally in the past, the only people who got to work in this way were those who'd made the journey, who'd realized their divine nature, who'd realized their oneness, who were living completely present within the Atma, within the self. And anything they looked upon became enlightened, because that was their nature. It was just reflected around them. But there is a way for people who come together with a spiritual awareness to allow their light to work together, to allow their light to communicate. It works because it is the divine light within you, and it is also part of the one. For example, you think sitting wherever you are in this room, you think there are all these different people sitting in the room. That is a complete illusion. That is just the one manifesting itself in different appearances, always remaining the one. It can never, ever be other than the one. The moment you say it is, you split the one into two. And the one is always the one. The light of the whole, the light of the world, is always the light of the world. It manifests itself in different ways. To have all these unique experiences of the one, yes. But you are not a separate person. You never were a separate person. You are a bit of light flashing into existence for a moment, bringing a bit of color out of non-being, speaking, then communicating to other bits of the one. And this is where it gets very, very beautiful, when the one begins to communicate with itself through the medium of the divine light of the human being. And that's what I really call working with light. And all one has to do, really, is to be open. As I said, the requirements before were you had to go through this intense process, and then you got the esoteric training of how to work on that level of oneness, on that level of divine light. But really, underneath, all you have to do is to say yes. To allow yourself, or allow the light within you to work in its true nature in relationship to the whole. To wake up to what it really is, which is one light. And then the miraculous can start to happen, because we are trapped within this illusion of our own individual self. Now you know that spiritually on your own journey, because the moment you awaken to anything, you realize that is an illusion, that is a prison, your individual self. But then you somehow, as Adyashanti was saying, you then claim it as my awakening. And you're caught in another illusion. It is never your awakening. That does not make any sense. Because that is the one thing the awakening freed you from. Something wakes up within you. The one wakes up within you. There's this lovely line from the poet Hafiz. What is all this love and all this laughter? It is the glorious sound of a soul waking up. Something within you, suddenly there is this moment of joy within the human being, this moment of laughter. That was my experience when I was 16 and I got woken up. Suddenly I laughed and laughed and laughed. I couldn't believe it. I thought the world was about one thing, and suddenly, in a moment, I realized it was about something else completely different. Completely different. This is when, like Adya was saying, you know that there was never a problem. There couldn't possibly be a problem. Of course, everything is just the way it ought to be. Not in any static sense, in a highly dynamic, continually changing way that needs your participation, that needs your aliveness, that needs your light. But then, what happens is you get that for a moment, then you go back to sleep, or you go into the snooze, And then you struggle again. But if we can recognize very consciously, use our little bit of conscious self that we have, you know that we are all one. We all know that by now. Even as a concept, right? Conceptually, we are all one. On this planet, we are all one. We're one ecologically. We're even now one economically, even though some have more of the one than the others. We're one on a communication level. I remember the first time I phoned my daughter. She was on a bus going from London to Oxford. I couldn't believe it, that I could just phone her and she could answer on the bus. We know we're one. You can phone anybody anywhere in the world, or and if you have a computer, you can access the internet, and it's all one, it's all there. We know we're all one. We have no idea what to do with that. We have no idea how oneness works because we take it back to ourselves. You know, it's like using the internet just to buy books from Amazon. We never really say, look, it's all one. Let's go into that oneness and see how it works. Let's see how the light within me that belongs to this oneness, how it's going to relate to the light of the world, to the light of oneness, to the light in this room. There is all this light now. You can feel it dancing around the room. It's going from person to person. And what's very beautiful is how it's communicating. You think you have to communicate with somebody and you have to, you have to talk to them. That is, yes, you do sometimes. And most of that is misunderstood, as you know. But he was speaking about relationship. But for me, the really exciting relationship is the relationship of oneness. How does oneness relate to itself? That might sound paradoxical. If it's oneness, it's all one. But that is a childish idea of oneness. You look at the oneness of the world, and the beauty and the horror and the terror and the butterflies and the bombs. It's oneness. It's not a static oneness, it's a highly dynamic oneness. We just haven't realized how it works because we're stuck in this image of duality, in this image of your and mine. And that is a complete illusion. You know there is no your and my oneness. There is oneness. And it seems to me if we're going to grow up, we have to grow into how to be present in oneness and how to let your energy relate to that. The light within you, the divine within you, the awakened part of you, be present in that oneness and communicate in that oneness. And it works very, very, very efficiently. Just like fiber optic cables are very efficient because they work with light. And all we have to do is say yes. It's very simple. Because that's all you ever have to do in any spiritual journey, really, when you come down to it, is to say yes. If you say maybe, you're on the waiting list. If you say yes, for Sufis we say, yes, beloved, do with me as thou wilt. I am just your servant. I am your idiot. I know nothing. Or you just say yes. I am fully present. And then this yes resonates. And as you know, life starts to respond to your yes. That's why Joseph Campbell, when he said, follow your bliss, what he was saying is follow your yes. Your bliss is your yes, whatever turns you on. And then he said, and if you do, unseen hands will open doors you didn't know existed. And none of you would be here if you hadn't had unseen hands opening doors. And that's the light within you, unlocking doors in the universe. It's very beautiful to see. And that light beginning to communicate and beginning to relate. And then a oneness begins to wake up. I don't know if you're aware, there is an unconscious oneness and there is an awakened oneness. For example, the world ecologically is one. But it is primarily unconscious. It is sleeping. I remember once flying back from Vancouver, flying over the forests, or what's left of them, in the northwest, and the islands there. And I could see it was sleeping. It was very beautiful, but it was sleeping. It was all one. You could see the water and the islands and the trees. It was all one, but it was sleeping. But there is the potential for it to wake up. And it is our awakened light that has that potential. And it seems that it's time that we started to use our light in service to the whole, in service to the one, and begin this extraordinary communication of light to light, in which your light speaks, relates to the light of one, which is the light of life. To me, it is a gift. You give back your light. It isn't really your light, but you give it back to life. And this is kind of the part of the experiment of being here. Because when different traditions, when different peoples come together, then there is a spark. There is a spark of a shared purpose that goes beyond our own individual intention, that is greater than us. And that shared purpose can wake something up, can change something. Just as we know how that changed us individually, how that woke something up inside of us, how somebody said yes to us, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And that light is alive. It's very, very, very beautiful. This light of oneness, this light, if you like, of the soul of the world, coming alive. And that is a shared purpose, because why else are we here than to help something wake up? That we can give our awakened state back to life. We can give our light back to life. Or we can give life's light back to itself. And one last thing, please do not take this too seriously. It is always a danger at spiritual gatherings to become full of too much serious intention, because life is not a serious intention. Well, it is, but not in the way we think. You just have to look around you, you know. Whether you live in California or Bosnia, it doesn't matter. It's so crazy. It's so completely absurd, particularly at this time in human history where life is about to self-destruct because people want more Coca-Cola. I don't quite understand why. It is extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily terrifying, and completely different to anything we can imagine, because it is alive. And we each have direct access to it. We are part of life. We are part of this. I think Tagore said, God hath made us infinite, such is his pleasure. And we are that one infinite being expressing itself again and again and again. I mean, there is a truth about oneness. And what interests me, if you like, is that this truth used to be only accessible on a kind of spiritual, mystical consciousness. And my sense is that is no longer so, that it is present. The lady was asking about this new energy that I was talking about that is present. For me, it's the energy of oneness, that there is an energy that we can tune into, an awareness that is just there, that we are one. And you see this in many, many walks of life. You don't have to be spiritual, you don't have to be a mystic, whether it's on a, say, global economic level or whatever. We are one family. The way humanity responded to what's happened in Pakistan just now, that shows that we are one. It's not a concept of oneness, it is a whole living body responding to a need. I can be much better, of course, and there are many, many needs that aren't responded to. But it is just to hold that awareness that we are one, and then to find out, and this is the experiment, how we live, and how we live with this knowing of oneness. And obviously, you know, on ecologically, you know, yes, we have to, you know, have an ecological awareness that we are one, and on a basic food level, as the lady was saying before. If we hold an awareness that we are one, then we will give when somebody is in need. We give, whether to the people in New Orleans or wherever, and that is obvious, and I'm sure everybody here is what they call socially responsible and does that. What interests me really, because it has a lot more potential in it, is to be, how does our spiritual consciousness, how can it participate in this world from a level of oneness? And what fascinates me about this, and one of the sort of experiential aspects of this gathering, is, as far as I understand, it hasn't been done before in the same way. There isn't a book about it, and there are spiritual books about almost everything. Okay, a lot of them were in Tibet and got burnt, but I can assure you, spiritual people, particularly mystics who say you can't write anything down, you can't say anything, have been writing and saying about it for hundreds of years, and almost every aspect has been written down. How spiritual consciousness of individuals functions as oneness in the world has not been written down. At least, I haven't seen it. Nobody's shown it to me. It's not in Borders or even in Amazon. And why? Because, as far as I understand, it's going to happen organically, because it is life recreating itself. When life reaches a crisis, it evolves, and traditionally it jumps a level of evolution. It jumps into a different level of consciousness, and this has happened organically in the past to humanity, and it is happening now. And there isn't a book about it, it hasn't been described, because it is us coming together with an openness and an awareness and a commitment to valuing that process, to saying this is important, this has real potential, and then seeing what happens, because we are all one. We know we are part of one, but how do we then live it? How do we then facilitate this spiritual dimension of oneness to come alive and begin to move and begin to change things? And this is where it requires, your participation. And that's about as far as I've got.
You said that we human beings have this light that we can draw on, and we can activate the landscape. At least this is what I understood you to say.
We can help the world to become alive. Yeah.
I don't understand about the landscape being sleeping.
No, I know.
Can you explain that a little more?
Probably not.
Is that your experience, or is that a Sufi teaching?
No. It's just my experience. I guess it comes from something I have been shown, which is there is a possibility at this time in cosmic evolution for the world to wake up. For just as a human soul can wake up, and then the life changes from what I call the difference in existence to being alive, that there is the possibility for the heart of the world to wake up, for the world to wake up. You see, I suppose I should put a context into this. There is a tradition that the world is a spiritual being. In some cultures it's called the Gaia theory, that in Sufism it is explained that the individual is a microcosm of the whole. They say that we are the lesser Adam and the world is the greater Adam. Now, a human being, as you know, is a quite extraordinarily beautiful, multi-dimensional being. We can exist on many different levels of reality. We can exist physically, mentally, emotionally. We can also exist even live on the plane of the self, which is a very different reality of just different experience. And that just as we are, so is the world. What this means is just as a human being has the potential to wake up, and as I said, many of you are here because something in you has woken up, otherwise why would you be spending your Saturday afternoon here when there are so many other delightful things to do? The world itself has the potential to wake up. This could be quite an extraordinary, unbelievably extraordinary thing. Just as you know from your own shift in consciousness and your shift in evolution from when you existed purely on the plane of the ego and the mind to when this other light in you woke up and you began to see a very different horizon, a very different life that has many other qualities. There is a tradition, long, long ago the world was awake, and they call it the Garden of Eden or the Golden Age. It was very beautiful, life was very simple, life was very pure, and the divine was experienced consciously as part of life. It's described in the Bible, I think, as when Adam and Eve saw God in the Garden of Eden. The relationship between the divine and individual consciousness was completely out there in the open. And then certain things happened and life moved on and we are here today. And so there is this potential for the world to wake up, for the world to make this shift in cosmic evolution. And part of this oneness, you see, what is very interesting is from a mystical perspective, oneness is a basic mystical experience. I call it Mysticism 101. And you know that everything is one. Many, many people have it, whether just looking up at a starry sky at night, or suddenly in the bath, or hearing a bird sing, or whatever. You know, Blake says to see the world in a grain of sand. You suddenly know that everything is one. You experience it. It is not a concept, it is not an idea, it's of course, everything is one. How could it be otherwise? Now, spiritually, this is the reality on the plane of the self. When you wake up to yourself, when you wake up on that plane, which I believe is called enlightenment, that is a plane of oneness. It is not ruled by the same laws as duality. It is everything there. It works differently. For example, things relate not through their differences, but through their resonance, through their attraction to each other. There is no object and subject. It is human beings relate together very differently there. Now, what interests me is that the consciousness of oneness belongs to the plane of the self and basically to an awakened human being. And yet, this awareness, this consciousness is at this present moment being given to the whole of humanity. It is, whether, as I say, it's ecological or through the internet or whatever, you can see it. You don't have to be clairvoyant to see that there is the potential now for human beings to be aware that they are one, that the world is one, that everything is one. And one not just on a horizontal plane of we're all part of the same living ecosystem, but it's actually much more profound because it means all the different planes of reality are also one. The plane of the self and this physical existence come together and they interpenetrate. Now what this means is just as a human being can wake up to the plane of oneness, so can the world. And it is a very, very special moment in the evolution of the world. There just is a possibility that this could happen. And it would be then, I have been fortunate to be shown somewhere what this could mean. And I always say it's when the world begins to sing again. When the heart of the world opens and the world begins to sing again, it's incredibly beautiful. And that will resolve many, many of the problems which exist in our world today, because, as Adya just shared, they belong to consciousness based on duality. And if the world wakes up, then it will throw off many of the apparent problems that surround it, because the world is a very, very beautiful, very powerful, living spiritual being. And just as what is interesting is, we are brought up in this culture to believe that we have problems. We're a kind of problem-addicted culture, and as you grow up, apparently to be a teenager, you have to know that you have problems and to know your problems. That's what being a teenager is, you know your problems, and often the problems are in relationship to your parents. Now, when you awaken spiritually, you realize you don't have a problem. You never did have a problem. You can't have a problem. I always give the example, it's like in an aeroplane, up above the clouds, the sun is always shining. You go to a place in yourself, and you realize, I remember when it happened to me, I realized, a human being can never have a problem. You can't. You're a divine piece of light and love, and you can't have a problem. You can have the illusion of a problem, yes, on the plane of the ego. On the plane of the self, problems do not exist. And one of the things that happens to you as you wake up is a lot of your apparent problems dissolve. And also you learn to live differently. As Adya said, you learn no longer to live from the point of duality. If you live from the point of oneness, then many, many problems just fall away. Now, if that can happen to an individual, I don't see any reason that an individual is this special thing. I think the individual is a microcosm of the whole, and the same can happen to the world. What I find sad is that we, in our arrogance, in this culture, have denied the world its divinity. And we think that the world is about us, rather than having a little bit of humility and saying, the world is the creation of the divine. Maybe it is about the divine. And once you step into that state of consciousness, then everything changes in the most simple and the most fundamental way. And then I think we can participate consciously towards the waking up of the world, which is also our waking up, because we are part of the world.
What is a minimalist? That's the first
Yeah.
question. Wanted to ask you.
Mm-hmm. And the second question?
Second question I also heard you say was to walk in the world without interference.
Without?
Without doing interference.
Without interference.
It was something like that, where one walks in the world without interfering in the world. That's how
Without interfering.
Interfering in others.
That's one of my, one of my deep natures is being a Taoist.
Yes, I heard that too.
And there is this Taoist, as kind of one of the things I have written on my mirror. You have those, what are they called? I've never quite, affirmations, yeah. So when you shave in the morning, you,
I don't usually.
No, nor do I, but. That's why it's very, very affirming. And it's this saying which is, less and less is done until nothing is done. When nothing is done, nothing is left undone. The world cannot be ruled by interfering. Yeah? So that's that really answers both questions, because that is for me what it is to be a minimalist. It is to do as little as possible. And if you do as little as possible, you try not to interfere. You try just to allow things to take their course. And that is... And somehow what's going to happen is going to happen. And what isn't going to happen isn't going to happen. And...
It's like it's flowing with the Tao. Is that this flow with the river?
Yeah. It was interesting because I was thinking a lot about what this gentleman yesterday was asking about. Why is it this moment in time? And I probably didn't answer it correctly or as fully as I could. And because at about 5 o'clock this morning I was meditating and then thinking about that, and then I realized, because somewhere if you look closely, if you sense, there are signs In our tradition, we're taught to read the signs. There is this saying in the Quran, actually, He has placed His signs on the horizons and in themselves, that they may know He is the real. And a lot of Sufi training is learning how to read the signs in the inner world and the outer world. In our tradition, we work with dreams a lot, because dreams are signs, in the same way that Adya was saying yesterday he'd noticed in movies. They were telling another subliminal story, these kind of apocalyptic movies. And that if you kind of listen within, also look without, not with a judgmental consciousness, not with any fixed idea, because part of learning to listen to the signs is learning to have a receptive consciousness, this feminine quality of just looking and watching. On a little bit of a sideline, I was very, very moved when the tsunami happened. Some people have heard me say this, that there is a sea tribe there called, I think, the Mekan, and they live in that area, and they have very few possessions. They live on these boats in the sea. Interestingly, they don't actually have any concept of time. It just isn't in their vocabulary. They live very much in the present, but at the same time, they were the only people who noticed the signs of what was going to happen. Those people who were on their boats, they saw the dolphins were swimming to deeper water. And they remembered in their ancestral memories that meant they should also go to deeper water. And there was this very, kind of tragic thing. There were the Burmese fishermen there, and they were fishing for whatever it is close to the shore there. And what the Mekan sailors said, or the Mekan people, they said that the Burmese fishermen weren't attentive. They weren't looking at the signs. And so they didn't notice what was happening. And so when the tsunami came, they all got killed. Their boats were all destroyed. But they saw the signs, and so the moment they saw the dolphins swimming to deeper water, it's something, they were attentive, and they took their boats and they went to deeper water. So when the tsunami came, they weren't actually wiped out. Their boats rode the waves in the deeper water rather than the very strong waves that came crashing into the ground. And so in our tradition, we're taught to be attentive to the signs. And one of the difficulties at the moment is that the signs are changing. That's why I wrote a book about it called The Signs of God. It was the old signs don't work anymore. The signs you used to look for, how to live a good spiritual life, how to do it properly, they don't work anymore. The signs are changing, and you have to be, and there isn't a book. You can't look at the signs and then go to your almanac and say, this means this. You have to really access your own deep inner wisdom, this knowing that comes from far deeper than judgmental consciousness. And if you go into this space, this attentiveness, this awareness of the inner and the outer worlds, you will notice that something is changing. I can tell you a little bit about how I notice it, but that's just me. It is like, I remember writing about it a few years ago, and that I saw that I called them the magical unicorns that used to live in the forest have come out of the forest for the first time in many millennia. There are certain currents that are present in the inner and the outer world that haven't been present here for a long time. And you kind of, if you like, it's like being an old-fashioned sailor. You kind of sniff the wind, or an old farmer, you smell the air and you see that a storm is coming. And it isn't in the weather forecast. Because remember, our weather forecasts just tell us about this temporal reality, about this world of the grooves that Adya was talking about. They're just, in a way, more grooves. But if you learn to listen, to be attentive, then you'll see something is happening. I call it the world is waking up. And it's asking certain people to be part of it. It's like sending out messages. You can't read them with rational consciousness. One of the reasons I was talking about light yesterday is that in a way, certain light within the world is talking to the light within us if we can actually stop what we're doing for a moment and listen to it. And to me, one of the importances of meditation is learning to have a discipline of being receptive, of being attentive, of just watching these currents. And there are extraordinary things happening. They're happening at the moment just behind the scenes. And if we can dare to be present, not in this apparent world around us, which looks like a complete disaster, which looks like a complete mess that's getting worse. And this is actually part of the seductive play of the illusions. I don't know how many people are aware of it, that if you like, the dying world is asking us to look at it because it has so many problems. It wants us to have our attention fixated on its death throes. Like Adya was saying on whether we rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. You know, if we do in this pattern, then we can save something. And it is this grip, this fascination, because always remember darkness is much more fascinating than light. Darkness holds our attention much more closely than light. But if for a moment we can step out of that, if we can turn our attention away from this fixation with what is happening, and we can learn to look somewhere else. I've repeated to our group a number of times this line from one of Shakespeare's plays, The Winter's Tale, which I always find very moving at this time, which is somebody says, "Now I came upon things dying and thou upon things newborn." And it's like, where do you look? Are you looking at what is dying? And what is dying is very visible around us. And what is interesting is that this is also very similar in our own process, because we get so fixated by our ego consciousness, and particularly when the ego consciousness starts to fall apart, we kind of cling to those bits of the shipwreck longingly, you know, like keeping old memories alive. And do we dare to allow something to fall away? It's like one of the things that you have to do on the path, in my understanding, is to allow the old concepts, the old ego to fall away, and not to be kind of trying to rearrange those deck chairs. And can we instead just say, okay, this is happening, it's terrible, there are many, many people suffering, we can pray for them, but maybe our attention is needed towards something else. Maybe we can dare to turn away from this particular screen. It's like there's one movie playing over there. And do we dare to turn away to where something is not definite, something is not defined, but there is a certain pulsating energy there. There is a certain quality of being coming into existence. And the moment we do, the moment we really say, okay, I am here for something other than myself. I am here for what might be. And I always find spiritually it's much more interesting to be here for what might be, for the potential which has not yet come into being. It's why I find spiritual life so exciting, because it always takes us towards something that is not yet present, that is coming into existence. And then we will notice that there is something happening. And if we are really attentive, it will begin to stir up ancient, ancient memories within us. That I use my concepts to describe it, because that's how it's spoken to me. That, say, for example, once the world was alive. There is this line by Leonard Cohen, God is alive, magic is afoot. Once there was magic present. Once the earth and human beings spoke directly to each other. Once there was real reverence and real respect for the power of nature. It was not just something to be controlled. I was very interested after what happened in New Orleans, and it was so tragic. Never did I hear from anybody once, this is an opportunity to revere a force greater than ourselves. Because the boat people, when their village was destroyed, because they live on the boats, but they also have villages, they accepted it. They said, this is part of the great cycle of nature. They lost everything and they don't have very much. But it is part of their deep reverence and respect for something greater than themselves to actually to say, okay, we have lost everything. And we have lost everything before. But nowhere did I hear that resonance, that awe before nature, before which to me is an aspect of the divine that we can't control, we can't package. But if we can dare to step into that other dimension, we will find that something is coming into being. What it will be, yes, I've had a particular vision of it that inspired me, that allowed me to talk about it. Whether it will be just like that or not, I don't know, and somewhere I don't care, because it isn't about what I can see or what I have shown. It's about what we can participate in, what we can be drawn into, how our light can resonate with a deeper light that is coming into existence. And to me, that is the challenge, that is the call. And it's very basic, either like Michel said, we're going to take the invitation. We don't know what it's for, we can't read that far. Or maybe it hasn't even been written. But that's so similar what happens when you begin a spiritual journey. You don't know what you're involved in. You don't know what you're being drawn to, but something draws you away from your conceptual understanding of yourself and your conceptual understanding of life. And it's, do you have the courage or the craziness, because for Sufis they go together, to say yes to that ultimate adventure of the soul. And now all I'm saying is, do we have the courage and the craziness to say yes to this ultimate collective adventure, to step outside this debris of the present time and begin to see what is coming into being. And my sense is the moment you say yes, and you're there and you're attentive and you're watching, then life, the divine, it doesn't matter what you call it, your deepest nature, the world soul, will speak to you. And then we can see, and then we can participate. And the rest is an adventure. And we don't know what will happen. And we don't know how it will be. And maybe it won't work out. And that doesn't matter either, because one should not be in any way conditioned by results. This is the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, to act without concern for the fruits of actions. And to be present in that emptiness of intention, of presence, of awareness, of participation, that is completely alive because it is not structured by any concept of how it ought to be. Then something can happen. Then something really newborn, not just a repackaged vision of the past, can come alive. And we can participate in it. And we can be present where the future is coming into being, in the moment.
I almost cannot dare to feel that hope and that yearning. But it feels like it's there.
I will cry to thee and cry to thee and cry to thee until the milk of thy kindness boils up. You know? And that is the deep relationship between the creation and the creator, between us and God, us and our divine self. It is extraordinary mystery, this mystery of the heart. What the heart responds to and why, and what it is in us that calls, and what is it that responds. And that's extraordinary mystery. And I personally feel it belongs to this whole core of life. For the Sufi, life is a love affair. Everything in life is in love. But we don't experience it. We're caught up in our mind, we're caught up in our concepts, we're caught up in the ego. So we miss this extraordinary love affair that's happening around us all the time. And occasionally we get an invitation. And occasionally a door opens and somebody says, hey, you want to join this dance. There's a very important dance over there of all the important ideas and theories and everything going on. And over here there's this ancient dance that is the dance of lover and beloved. The dance, my teacher, he said, in the whole of the universe there are only two, the lover and the beloved. God loves his creation and the creation loves God. And to recognize that, it's a very, very strange truth. It's all around us, every moment. Everything is loving something. Everything is in love. And for some reason, for some extraordinary reason, it's veiled from us. It's hidden from us. And we get caught up in all of the dramas of ourselves. And then, say somebody, for some reason, lifts a veil, and suddenly we are there. Rumi says, step out of the circle of time and into the circle of love. Give one life and take 100. And the Sufis, they talk about the arena of love, and you get taken into the arena of love, and the only cost is yourself, of course. This is the... I would love to kiss you, and the price of this kiss is your life. And my love came running towards my life, shouting, take it, it's a bargain. But again and again and again we sell this love for a few, pieces of silver, for something to protect ourselves, something to hide away from, some illusion. And then this mystery, then suddenly they say, life, God, the beloved, lifts a veil, opens a door, and then we get this opportunity. And what is important is to take the opportunity. You don't know when it's going to come again. You don't know when the tide will bring that ship from somewhere else that you can get onto. It might be 10 years before it arrives again. You don't know. And that's why the Sufi is traditionally the child of the moment, because you have to be present in the moment to catch that opening into something that is always present. Everything in life is in love with everything else. Always. And we are part of it. And the unique thing of being a human being is we can experience it consciously. Our heart can break for God again and again. So many tears we can cry. So much love we can feel. I think sadly, because it is like maybe for some reason somebody has been kind to me, and I have experienced that limitlessness of love, that ocean of love. There is so much love. It's not anywhere else. It's not in some deep mystical state. It's not in the planes of non-being. It's here. And it's like an enormous banquet, and there's a table full of it, and people, sincere people, good people, altruistic people, they are happy with just the crumbs from the table of love. For some reason, something holds them back from taking the glass of wine and drinking it to the dregs, drinking it all, and then asking for more and asking for more. The one thing you can be greedy about is the truth and love. And there is always more. And and then you can be where life is happening, not some illusion told in the newspapers, but where life is really taking place, where the beloved is recreating himself. And what I find fascinating about this moment in time, and for me it is a very special moment in time, is the beloved is recreating himself again in a completely new way, in a way he hasn't done for centuries. A friend of mine in Australia, had a vision in which he was shown that the beloved is revealing himself in this world, or going to reveal himself in this world, going to be present again in this world in a way that he hasn't been for millennia. He is coming back to his world. He is going to take over his world again. He gave it to humanity. Maybe we didn't do such a good job. And he is sad for what has happened to his world, and his heart is crying for what has happened to his world. Or the soul of the world is sad and has cried out to the beloved, come back again, I have missed you, I have been longing for you for so long. And he has heard that call. And the beloved is coming back. And we can be present, or we can be busy doing other things. And many, many people, they will be busy doing other things, even other spiritual things, even well-meaning spiritual things, but they won't be present at this moment. They won't welcome the beloved back into his world. And it says in the Bible, you never know the hour that the bridegroom cometh. And so you have to wait. And one of our practices is always to be attentive, always to be waiting. There is a Sufi practice, you have to be like the cat at the mouse hole, infinitely relaxed and infinitely attentive. Because otherwise you go to sleep and maybe the moment is past and you don't know you've missed it. And I've seen that happen to people. And then a veil falls over their eyes and something is lost. And that opportunity for that human being, maybe it comes again in 10, 20 years, maybe it doesn't, you don't know. We are so caught up in these identities of our ego, of thinking of how it should be and how it is, and we don't know. That's why there are very, very few spiritual practices that one needs, but to be attentive, and to be present, and to have an open heart. It's all the same, attentiveness, presence, and open heart. You can't be either attentive or present without an open heart. And to want to say yes, to participate in this extraordinary love affair that is taking place. And it's incredibly beautiful. Yeah? And something why do I say this? Because I see something has touched your heart. You don't know what it is. Your mind is trying to understand it. Something is, if you like, tugging at your heartstrings. And it is very, very important because it is part of the mystery of creation. We have put creation in a box, and then we have labeled it, and then we have given it problems. And creation, being a very magical, extraordinary thing, which we don't really understand, has then obliged, and it has created problems for us. And it has behaved as if it exists in a box. That's when I was talking yesterday about the world is asleep. It appears to be asleep, but it is not in a box. It is only behaving like it is in a box. And there is a possibility that it might burn up that box. It might break free of that box. It might wake up and come alive. Because it is an incredibly beautiful expression of the divine. It is so beautiful. If you see this world from outer space, from in deep meditation, you can go into states of meditation where you go beyond the world. And then you come back and you see the light of the souls of humanity spinning around the world. And you see this beautiful being. It's a little sad at the moment, yes. It has the sadness of neglect, like a beautiful woman who is neglected. But it is waiting for something to happen. And we are part of that. And to me we have to honor that and to be here and to wait. To wait as... I always go back, because one goes back to one's first experience. I don't know if you know, there is a spiritual truth that really the first awakening you have is like the seed. Everything is present. The Naqshbandis say the end is present at the beginning. And everything, in a way, your whole experience is there at that moment. And for me I was there in the garden of life. It was a garden beside the Thames in London. And everything was alive, and everything was singing. And the water was sparkling with not just the light of the sunlight on it, but with a different light. I didn't know then. I was 16. I knew nothing of spiritual life. I didn't even know spiritual life existed because I grew up in a Church of England family. We went to church, but God was, up there in heaven, and spiritual life didn't exist. And suddenly somebody took me to this magical garden that was called life. And it was there, and everything was just the way it ought to be. But we had forgotten about it. And yeah, it's so simple. Well, spiritual things are so simple. Thank you. If you really knew what was happening right now, something inside of you would just wake up. It's like spring after a 10,000-year winter. It is like seeing that, you know, in England, the first snowdrops, when they come through, and you know that kind of miserable grey English winter is over. And it's like the heart would just say, hey, this is so extraordinary. This is just one of those moments. And that's all you need. And that's, nothing else matters. Because, yeah.